Welcome to the latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and this session we are going to be talking about the causes of the war in Gaza. How much of the historical tradition of European colonialism in places like the Americas, Africa, the Caribbean islands, India, the Middle East, including Palestine before 1948, contribute to this attitude of European racial superiority over the indigenous inhabitants of the places they colonized, which ultimately led us to the mess we're in Gaza and the West Bank. How much of the colonial attitude, Merrick, do you think brought us to where we are now?
1,000%. And I'm saying this because what the Europeans have skillfully done is they have used the Bible to justify and juxtapose their will on other people's. And really given, and a lot of, and basically this started with the doctrine of discovery, in which one of the popes split the so-called New World. It wasn't a New World, there was already people there, in half between Spain and Portugal, and then the other European powers got involved. And so there were doctrines literally created to subjugate and kill the indigenous populations of these areas. Also too, what's really, I think, also the start of this is the idea of race in terms of physical characteristics. And that was created out of thin air by a scientist who claimed that the white race was superior because he found some skulls in the Caucasus and they were more beautiful than anyone else's skull he had collected from around the world, and so they must be a superior race. And this is who we're following. This is what people believe. And so I think I have to laugh when people talk about Europeans as Caucasians, because that is not true. Every European is not a Caucasian. If you're a Caucasian, you're from the Caucasus Mountains. So Kim Kardashian is literally a Caucasian because she's from Armenia, which is where in the Caucasus Mountains. The French, maybe not so much. The English, maybe not so much, right? And so again, this has to do with a lot of ignorance around history. And what this white supremacy has done, it's like a virus that is literally killing people. And I think that one of the things that would help the situation is if the European powers, particularly the colonial European powers, acknowledge what they did to millions of people around the world, and they started paying up. And paying up doesn't just look like monetary stuff. It looks like, give me back the stuff you stole from me. Like the Hope Diamond, like people's genitals literally being displayed in museums around Europe. Really? These things need to be returned, and we need reparations, because what was done to the peoples around the world by the colonial powers is affecting us today. Many of us are who we are because of forced sexual assault by the Europeans. And really nobody has ever really said, we're sorry, let's see how we can work together. We haven't heard that. And I think it's very important for people to understand where this comes from. This didn't come out of thin air. This was clearly an orchestrated project to rape the earth. That's how I see it.
Doug, we're pretty clear on how Merrick thinks about colonialism. How much do you attribute colonialism to what we're seeing today, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza?
Well, I think in an immediate sense, there's no question that colonialism had its effect. I mean, that's how how the whole thing got started there. I would want to suggest, however, that I think if it's easy in our moment in history to make European colonialism kind of a unique form of evil, and I would just suggest if you look through human history, any group that has the power to do it does the equivalent. So it's not unique. I mean, it happens to be the most recent, Europe was in ascendancy most recently. And so we are looking at the acute effects of European colonialism. But it's not, this whole kind of stuff didn't start with Europe. It didn't, it's been around forever. But there's no question that what we're facing now is certainly an example of that, and is a spinoff from that, without doubt. I mean, you even can see it in the rhetoric. There was one of the, I forget whether it was the defense minister, somebody from Israel talked about they're going to take over Gaza and make the desert bloom. This is European colonialism. It is, you guys are too barbaric to make good use of the land you have. We can make so much better use of it. So we have a right to come in and just do what we want to do. And I think that attitude is, right out of the European colonial playbook.
Yeah, we're stuck with that. But there's another thing that brings me to the next question about the certainty of the beliefs of Christian doctrine and how much that contributes to the continuity that we are facing today. Doug, the certitude that God is behind me and Jesus told us this is what we have to do, and now we're just implementing it because we have the divine will to do it.
Absolutely. And I think that, and again, I don't think it's unique to Christian religion, but it's certainly been a major factor in the history of Christianity that, because Christianity starts by defining an in-group and an out-group, right? The believers and the unbelievers. The unbelievers are not only subhuman, they're going to go to hell for all time anyway. So, you've got that setup. And so therefore, they don't deserve the same rights and privileges as we believers. And I think that sets up the format for that outsider scapegoating that, I raised at the beginning, that you're not one of us. God is on our side. We're the good guys. You're the bad guys. I always thought it was very ironic. If you look at some of the writings of the early church fathers in the 2nd century, a number of them make the point that one of the joys of going to heaven is you get to sit up there and look down, smirking at the people in hell suffering. We don't say that anymore. That's become an unthinkable idea, for example. There's an unthinkable idea, right? We can't say that anymore, but we think it, and the people who believe that think it. That part of the joy of being saved is that other people were unsaved. It would take a lot of the fun out of it if you thought everybody was saved.
You haven't been to a Black church, my friend, because there's still some churches that preach fire and brimstone. They will throw everybody and anybody into hell. It's really bad. It really is. And it's a lot of this also too, when we, as you attributed to the Holy Fathers, is that there were many different types of Christianity, and the Christianity that didn't kind of toe the line of the Emperor Constantine when he consolidated the churches, those are the people who literally got the axe, like they were murdered.
Yep.
So part of the challenge also is, in a country that claims to be Christian, is many people who claim to be Christian don't even know the tenets of their own religion, nor do they know the history of it. They have no idea why Christmas is on December 25th in the West, and in the East it's a different date. They don't even realize how many books of the Bible there are, depending on the church. Like, it's more than 66 books. It's 72 and 77, depending if you're Anglican, you're Roman Catholic, or Eastern Orthodox. But many people don't know that, and that goes back to my point of education. If people knew where this stuff came from, they would be able to make logical and rational decisions about what they believe, how they believe, and what that looks like in the real world.
Yeah.
The Bible is a book that people attribute to coming from the inspiration of God, but actually it was a book that was edited by the editors, whoever decided to do the editing. Go ahead, Doug. I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to add to Barrett's comment that not only there are many brands of Christianity, but historically, nobody persecuted Christians more viciously than other Christians, other sects. Right. Within 100 years of Constantine, more Christians had been martyred by other Christians than the Roman Empire ever did, than the pagans ever did to them. So, you're right. I think we are right and you are wrong. That absoluteness of Christian religion feeds violence and feeds this kind of attitude.
Yes, the certainty that God is behind me, and if God's behind me, how can I be wrong?
How can I be wrong?
Okay, we're going off a little bit to another area of our country. College campuses have become a central part of the American component of this war. There have been demonstrations in support of the Palestinians that have been outlawed by the university administrations, declaring them as anti Semitic hate speech. I was in college during the Vietnam War, and we believed our protests against the genocide, which took 2 million Asian lives, had a major impact in stopping it. What is the status of free speech on college campuses in relation to this war or in general? We lost the president of Harvard had to give up her job, a black woman, because she wasn't hard enough. Doug, what do you think about all that?
Well, I think free speech on campuses is under tremendous danger right now. And for several reasons. One is we have a lot of people in the Republican Party, certainly, who really see it as appropriate to regulate free speech in the name of their ideology. The second big thing that's unique to the Israeli situation is that to allow pro-Palestinian voices upsets a lot of big donors. Historically, the Jewish community have been major supporters of education and have donated extensively. The Vietnamese weren't donating. It's a whole different world. So I think the problem is a lot of this is money driven. I think that at the point people were threatening to take away hundreds of millions of dollars worth of donations. Colleges, unfortunately, are businesses, first and foremost. They may be technically nonprofits, but they make a handsome profit and they count on that. And I think we're in a very dangerous situation. I really do.
Okay, Merrick, college campuses. How do you assess that?
I would have to agree with Doug. I was born at the end of the Vietnam War. I heard a lot of stories. I saw a lot of film about the protests, and that excited me. I've been an activist since I was 16, and it's been a ride. That being said, in regard to Dr. Gay, I think that Doug is absolutely right. It was a money thing, particularly when we had the less than honest person, what's his name, Ackman, and then the rabid racist Christopher Rufo, who started the whole critical race theory panic. They were definitely behind that. It led to death threats against Dr. Gay. And it has come to light that Ackman's wife is a plagiarist. And she's not just any plagiarist, she plagiarized from Wikipedia. Hello, like professors tell you, don't use Wikipedia. Why would you plagiarize from it? And that for me, it just shows the level of hypocrisy. Both Ackman and Rufo claim to have graduated from Harvard. It wasn't the Harvard that we know. One was an extension, and I think Rufo got something, or he dropped out, or whatever. Well, neither of them weren't at Harvard, and so clearly, this is it's hypocrisy. I do feel bad for the kids on those campuses that really do care about that situation, but their speech is being stifled. But I also want to bring into this conversation the morality of these millionaires and billionaires trying to dictate speech. Like, it seems to me, how repugnant is it that you would support the murder of women and children and then deny young people to stand up and say no more killing these babies? What are we in? We are in a moral black hole led by people whose modus operandi is greed, anger, and stupidity, if you ask me. And College is actually where a lot of people learn to have their voice, learn about advocacy, have, how to be an advocate. A lot of what I learned from from Morgan State University was how to advocate on behalf of the people. And so I feel sorry for these kids today because at the end of the day, their speech is being stifled because some billionaire with zero conscience doesn't like what they say. Meanwhile, he or she is doing things to undermine students of color, faculty of color. This whole idea of we want to get rid of DEI or whatever, affirmative action hires. This is about people feeling that when America becomes more diverse, they'll be left behind. And maybe they ought to step up their game, and so they won't be left behind.
The,
Excellence. No race holds some type of trophy of excellence.
Before I get to the last question, I just want to comment on your DEI thing. It was Fox News, Laura Ingraham, and Elon Musk are blaming Boeing's DEI, diversity inclusion, for the bolts that they didn't tighten on the door of the airplane that blew off. They're saying that the reason the door blew off was because of DEI. How's that for stretching it?
Right. And you see how sick and crazy that is. And again, going back to the people who lack logical frameworks and lack critical thinking, they'll see this and be like, yeah, and that doesn't make any sense. But I think it's very interesting that Mr. EM is going through all of this when his father literally married his own stepdaughter, who he met at 8 and married years later. Like, you should probably not say anything because you seem to come from a family of perverts. Like, come on. Really?
Last question. In August 1967, 2 months after the Six-Day War, during which Israel captured and occupied the Palestinian territories of the West Bank and Gaza, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, published an article in its newsletter, which said in part, quote, "We recognize Hitler's massacre of the Jews as one of the worst crimes against humanity. By the same token, we do not see how the Jewish refugees and survivors could ever use this tragedy as an excuse to imitate their Nazi oppressors, to take over Palestine, to commit the same atrocities against the native Arab inhabitants, and to completely dispossess the Arabs of their homes, land, and livelihood." End quote. Imitating the Nazis is probably the most horrendous accusation one can make against the government of Israel. But is it true, Merrick?
Let's see here. You've got Bibi Netanyahu referencing the biblical text in the story of Amalek, quoting the text saying that everything that's living should be killed. Then you have different members of the Knesset saying that there should be voluntary relocation. Apparently, they want to take the Palestinians to either the Sinai Desert or the Congo. You literally have people calling for the genocide of children. We have reports of children in the West Bank being shot randomly by IDF. What does that look like? I don't like to throw the Nazi term around, but I will say that the behavior of different politicians in that space and what they have said is clearly on that train. It is revolting and in fact quite sick. And remember, I said at the beginning of this conversation, they want to open this conflict to Lebanon and ultimately Iran. So to me, in my mind, that sounds like World War III. And we have to ask ourselves, why is Bibi and his weirdo genocidal friends cheering on expanding the war? And why does America seem complicit in that? We need to ask ourselves the hard questions because, as I said before, most Americans don't want to be involved in these conflicts. We don't. And this is across the board. Democratic voters, Confederate GOP voters, independents do not want to be in these wars. Something needs to be done. And we also have to remember, last but not least, that Bibi's trying to stay out of jail because he's still up on corruption charges. So the longer this war carries on, the less the less spotlight on him and his own corruption. So there are a lot of selfish motives in this, and we've also heard that there's a gas and oil deposit off the coast of Gaza, which is another thing that people are thinking about. Like, are they doing this to the Palestinians so that they can get that oil and gas deposit in the sea? We need to start asking a lot of questions and demanding our government no longer fund this enterprise of murder. It needs to stop.
Doug, am I being, or was SNCC being unfair in saying that the Israeli government was imitating Nazis?
Well, they certainly chose to put it in the most provocative of terms. They wouldn't have had to have done that, and that unfortunately puts more heat than light on the debate. But I think, essentially there's a lot of parallels, but this shouldn't surprise us. Freud wrote about the fact that if a child is subjected, or a person is subjected, a young person, to various forms of abuse, physical particularly, that there are two paths you can go. You can have a reaction formation where you reject that kind of behavior as horrible and you don't want to duplicate it. But that a high percentage of people will do what Freud called identification with the aggressor. They have been so victimized and felt so powerless that they can't resist taking on that role if they get the power to do it. Mm-hmm. So Elon Musk being a prime example, by the way, his father humiliated him constantly. Mm-hmm. And so he humiliates everybody else. Trump, same thing, actually. Interesting. Mm-hmm. But I think whole cultures can do that. And it's important to remember the Israelis are not united on this. There are plenty of Israelis who oppose this war and think this is barbaric. But I think Netanyahu and the people in power are identifying with the aggressor, and they're to some extent enjoying that exercise of power. But it also has practical gains for them, as Merrick was pointing out. The best way to stay in power is to create a common enemy, right? If you feel like your hold on power is precarious, villainize somebody out there and we'll all unite. And that's been throughout human history, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's easy to do that. And so in the war, look what it's done to Hamas. Hamas's popularity among the Palestinians has soared in spite of all their suffering, right? So the people who are running this war gain a lot by keeping the war going.
Yes.
And I think that's it. And I think, and it kind of gets back to another point, I think, about war and this villainization of the outgroup. If you think about war, if you're a leader and you want to have a war for whatever reason, you've got the formidable task of getting a lot of nice young men who just want a normal life to go out, put their lives in jeopardy, and shoot a lot of other nice young men on the other side who want a normal life. Convincing them to do that is quite an achievement in propaganda and indoctrination, right? So how do you do that? You turn the other group into a dangerous, subhuman species that needs to be eradicated. And God knows our country did that. Look at the propaganda during the world wars about the Huns and and the Japs. And oh my God, we did exactly the same thing.
As they did to us.
As they did that. It's universal. Yeah. Because how else do you get young men to go out and do that? Think of when we take it for granted because we're so much part of our culture, but My God, what a thing it is to get a whole huge number of young men in the prime of their early life with all their hopes and dreams and what they want out of life to go off and do that and to do things that in any other context they would find morally reprehensible of
Yeah.
killing other nice young men. That is really hard to get people to do. So we've really perfected as a human society how to convince people to do such a subhuman thing.
Yeah, I think playing soccer, playing football is much more desirable way to let out your. Okay, Doug, Merrick, great discussion. Thanks so much. This was a tough topic, so thank you so much for that. And all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening. Until next time, bye now.